everyone to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into the second segment of today's show, I do want to remind you to leave a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. It means a lot to the network, to both me and my fellow podcasters as well. So any tip or donation or even question which I can answer at the beginning of the next episode, whatever helps the network, please do consider donating at the link gsmc.cloud. Now, moving on to the second segment of today's show, we have gone over all the IDP rankings except for one. I could call them the quarterbacks of the defense. Yes, I'm talking about the defensive backs. We have a solid group in this top 10 who I really like. Some of my favorite players are on this list, and it is reflected in how all of these different defenses have shown up on this list as well, both young and old. So I'm really excited to present them to you. I think I'm going to count down backwards today. I know that I've started at the top, but I want to build up anticipation, plus since of adding graphics into my shows, I kind of want to start off at the bottom as well, because also at the bottom is one of my favorite players on that team right there in the back right there. So let's start off without further ado. Coming in at number 10 on this list, like I said, Devin Witherspoon. What a player he is. What a steal at number 5 overall last year for the Seattle Seahawks. Let's go over his stats. 56 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, only 1 interception, but the impressive stat that stands out to me is his 16 pass breakups. An incredible season for the Seattle Seahawks. And honestly, guys, don't sleep on the Seattle Seahawks defense. They are an up-and-coming, hungry defense that just got one of the best defensive minds in all of football, in Mike Macdonald, as their head coach. So I am really excited to see how Mike Macdonald revamps this defense, gets them back into that Legion of Boom mindset, starting off with that aggressive secondary. Obviously, Devin Witherspoon is going to be the face of that secondary, but they still have Reek Woolen. Although he had a down year last year, I think that he will come back more hungry than ever, more fiery than ever. He's a stellar athlete. And also on the back end, they have that experience as well, with Julian Love in there as well. And up front, they're getting more dangerous. Draymond Jones coming back to Seattle. Also, Jaron Reed, don't forget about him. They're starting to round into a defense that in the next couple of years, and maybe not next year, when Macdonald's plans are implemented, I think that this defense is very exciting, and Devin Witherspoon definitely, in my opinion, deserves to be in the top 10 coming into a second year. A very long, rangy corner, may not get as many picks as you would like out of someone who you might entrust in your IDP league fantasy team, but ultimately, Devin Witherspoon is a young corner who shows a lot of promise, and a young defense that is going to show a lot of promise in the upcoming years. So at number 10, Devin Witherspoon. Don't sleep on the Seahawks. Go Hawks. At number 9 overall is one of these guys. Also, these two players right here, and Devin Witherspoon and the guy I'm going to mention next, are the only 2 cornerbacks on this list. So be wary when you are drafting your IDP team that not many cornerbacks are in the top 10. The list the rest of the way is going to be safeties after this guy, so be warned right there. But coming in at number 9, kind of an interesting guy because of the fact that this particular team's secondary is trying to get younger. They still have older guys in there, but they want to meld this experience with the young talent that they have brought in, and I think this guy is the bridge to that. Reed Blankenship. Last year he had 79 solo tackles, no forced fumbles, 3 picks, and 11 pass breakups. And like I said before, Reed Blankenship is kind of the bridge guy to this young Eagles secondary. This year, they had 2 steals in the draft, in my opinion, in Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, 2 guys that are going to immediately come in and perhaps start, but they still have guys like Darius Slay in this team. So the question mark for the Eagles secondary going into the season is, A, who is going to start, and B, how do you build this team that wants to take the next step and get younger, while also trying to incorporate a guy like Darius Slay who could still add that IQ to the secondary, into the squad, And I think that Reed Blankenship rankings in the top 10 reflects that, because he is seen as a kind of low-key kind of profile guy, not the obvious pick in that Eagles secondary if you're looking at an IDP team. But I still think he is an asset to this Eagles team. He is still one of the younger guys who could potentially be the leader of the new secondary in the future for the Eagles, obviously incorporating Mitchell and DeJean into the team later on in the process. But Reed Blankenship, I think he's well deserved to be in the top 10. Only 2 cornerbacks in both him and Spoon, so that's pretty impressive for him. Coming in at number 8, the first safety on the list, and a guy who is going to be in this team's defensive plans for many years to come, already showing his talent, Kyle Hamilton. Kyle Hamilton is one of those players on the Baltimore Ravens defense that now is going to have an even bigger role because of the fact that Geno Stone and his production is gone to their rival Cincinnati Bengals. And the only other corners of note are Marlon Humphrey and Arthur Millette. And so Kyle Hamilton will be entrusted a lot in terms of the secondary. Last year he had 63 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble, 4 interceptions, and 13 pass breakups. So you can see the level of production that he brings to the back end of the Ravens secondary. Obviously, they don't have Mike McDonald anymore, so we'll have to see how he continues to progress under new defensive coordinator Zach Orr. But Kyle Hamilton in this top 10 ranking does not feel like an over-ranking in the slightest. He's going to be one of the most exciting players in an IDP league this year. Watch out for him, because he is going to be one of the best young players in that Baltimore Ravens defense that is continuing to grow. And I think that the transition from McDonald to Orr will be seamless for him. But coming in at number 7, a guy who many people might not have heard of, mainly due to the fact that this secondary doesn't necessarily get talked about that much, but this year I do think that they will have to be, and that is Josh Metellus. Last year he had 78 solo tackles, 4 forced fumbles, 1 interception, and 5 pass breakups. Josh Metellus is one of those guys in the Vikings secondary who often gets overlooked, mainly due to the fact that the problems that lay in the Vikings defense aren't in the back end. I think it all starts with the defensive front. They lose a lot of production up there. They add Jonathan Greenard, who's an interesting piece, but in terms of defensive fronts, Minnesota is no longer one of the stronger ones. And so the secondary now will step into the limelight for the Minnesota Vikings, in my opinion, this year, because of the fact that so much production up front is gone. And so you have to acquaint yourself with the name Josh Metellus and a guy later on in this list, because they are now the faces of the Minnesota Vikings secondary. These are guys that have been in the league for about 3 to 4 years, but really haven't had a chance to make names for themselves due to the fact that the Minnesota secondary was always about Harrison Smith, and then you had to focus on the problems they had up front. So Josh Metellus is a name to remember. I think that him being ranked in the top 10 goes to show how much ESPN is looking at Minnesota's secondary to step up. So look out for him as a potential steal in an IDP league. Moving on to number 6, another safety and guy in the NFC North who is also a part of another interesting new look defense. That is Jaquan Brisker of the Chicago Bears. Last year he had 66 solo tackles, 2 forced fumbles, 1 pick, and 9 pass breakups. And when I look at the Chicago Bears defense, it's very similar to the Seattle Seahawks defense. Young up-and-comers on the secondary, and guys like Jalen Johnson, who was a Pro Bowler last year, Kyler Gordon, going to get incorporated into this team, and Tyreek Stevenson. I think the Bears defense is going to be very good, much like the Seahawks, in the next couple of years. I think that Jaquan Brisker is not the most popular of this Bears secondary, but the stats speak for themselves. I think he's a very solid piece. Another potential steal in an IDP league, in my opinion. I'm looking forward to seeing how the Bears DBs progress together, because this is a young unit, much like my favorite team, the Seattle Seahawks, like I said, that is very focused on attack mode, and I think that it's going to reflect in the next couple of years. So look out for Jaquan Brisker. Getting into the top 5, these top 5 guys are very diverse, and I really like the top half of this list, so I'm really excited. But coming in at number 5 is a guy who, when he's fully healthy, is one of the most dynamic defensive backs in the league. He has a new head coach, so we're going to have to see how he progresses there, but I'm talking about Derwin James. Derwin James, one of the preeminent safeties in this league, that can really change the way people view the Chargers defense. Last year he had 86 solo tackles, no forced fumbles, 1 interception, and 7 pass breakups. But the huge question about the Chargers defense is how are they going to transition from Brandon Staley, who had this overwhelming stigma surrounding him and how he viewed the Chargers defense, to now when they have Jim Harbaugh, who wants to change the whole philosophy and culture of the Los Angeles Chargers. And he definitely has the defensive pieces to do that. You have guys at every level of the defense on the Chargers, in Joey Bosa up front, Khalil Mack in the middle, and a guy like Derwin James in the backfield, that are really solid pieces to build around if you're Jim Harbaugh. I think that when Derwin James and Asante Samuel are together in that backfield, they're both fully healthy. The Chargers have one of the scariest backfield duos in the entire NFL. And I'm looking forward to how Jim Harbaugh implements his defensive game plans with this team that has been much maligned over the past years for having so much talent and not producing. And Derwin James, look for him to benefit. I think he could potentially be in the top 3, if not number 1 overall in terms of IDP. So I'm really excited to see how he progresses. Coming in at number 3, a guy who's now down another backfield partner, but moves on to the Atlanta Falcons, Jesse Bates III, 89 solo tackles last year, 3 forced fumbles, 6 INTs, and 11 pass breakups. Jesse Bates is one of those guys who, I think, moving from the Cincinnati Bengals, where he was paired with Eli Apple as one of the best backfields in the AFC North for the past couple of years, moving on to Atlanta, a defense that really hasn't had that much depth, that much production over the past couple of years, wanting to get back to the force. They bring in Raheem Morris, a defensive-minded coach, so I'm really excited to see how Jesse Bates progresses under Raheem Morris's tutelage. I think that Jesse Bates has been one of the best DBs in the league over the past couple of years, and he well deserves to be in the top 3. Coming in at number 2, a surprise in my opinion. We talked about the Vikings secondary. This is the second piece to that. Cameron Bynum, 94 solo tackles last year, 3 forced fumbles, 2 INTs, 9 pass breakups. Cam Bynum and Josh Patelis, I can't say this enough, will now have to produce for the Minnesota Vikings. It's reflected in ESPN's rankings. There's no production up front for the Minnesota Vikings anymore. Only Jonathan Greenard I can think of. But ultimately, Cam Bynum is a solid player. He just hasn't had that high-profile image to kind of make his name known. So you need to get acquainted with the Minnesota Vikings secondary, in my opinion, because they could be huge steals in terms of IDP. But coming in at number 1, one of the best young safeties in the league, in a defense that has a lot of interesting pieces, a very underrated defense in my opinion, that is Antoine Winfield Jr. 26 solo tackles last year, 6 forced fumbles, 3 INTs, 12 PDs, one of the most rangy DBs in the league. Very talented, very skilled, following in his father's footsteps. I love Antoine Winfield Jr. in this Bucs defense that has a lot of different pieces that they're trying to figure out how to fit into this defensive squad. They're an underrated defense. They're an underrated team, in my opinion, and Antoine Winfield is quickly becoming one of the young faces of that squad. But that should just about do it. I had such a pleasure talking to you about IDP leagues and ranking these different position groups. But coming up next, we transition from IDP to fantasy college football, where I will be talking about my top 10 in terms of running backs and wide receivers. Should be very exciting. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk with